Hi, my name's Ben, and I'm working on a strategy game about colonies in Unity. In this devlog, I start working on the multiplayer mode for the game. So I had absolutely no idea how to make multiplayer, but you've got to start somewhere, so the first thing I did was do some research on the different network frameworks I could use, like Netcode for GameObjects, Netcode for entities, Mirror, Photon and Fishnet. In the end, I decided to use Netcode for GameObjects as it seemed simpler for beginners, and it's well suited to smaller scale games with no more than 4 players in the same multiplayer game. I followed an amazing tutorial by Samyam to create a game similar to Slither.io to learn the basics of using Netcode. I'd definitely recommend it if you want to learn how to make your first multiplayer game. The only problem I had was that I used more recent versions of the libraries used in the tutorial, but actually debugging the errors myself was good practice. One thing I took from the tutorial is how having clean and efficient code is particularly important in multiplayer, as you need to minimise the amount of data being sent across the network. I also learned some things I feel like I should have known a lot earlier, like the fact that you can press a button to lock the inspector window. So I've actually had this game idea for a while, and 2 years ago I did attempt to make a multiplayer version of the game using Photon. I'm still using a copy of the original project files, and if you're observant you might have noticed that there's always been a Photon folder. I remember getting stuck trying to synchronise movement, but with my new knowledge I now feel ready to take on the challenge of multiplayer again. This time though, I'm going to be using Netcode so I can delete the old folders. I installed Netcode, multiplayer tools and parallel sync, which basically means I can have multiple editor windows of the game open, which just makes testing easier. So I pretty quickly realised the problem that getting players to connect with each other online is quite complicated, so for now I'm just going to focus on trying to get multiplayer to work for players in the same local area network. I made a basic multiplayer movement script, and then I made a script which sets up LAN connections. This worked fine, but the only issue is that clients have to type in the IP address of the host device, which is a bit annoying. Now, for some reason, I really struggled trying to code changing of scenes for multiplayer. For example, changing from the multiplayer menu scene to the lobby scene. After a while, I ended up with something that seemed to be working, although there's probably a much better way of doing it. Next, I allow players to have usernames. There are difficulties with sending strings over a network, so I had to use fixed strings to send usernames instead. If a player doesn't enter a username, the username will default to anonymous, and I added validation so that usernames can't be more than 20 characters. After this, I added some code to ensure that there can only be a maximum of 4 players in the game. I also made a start game button appear on the host screen when there are at least 2 players in the game. I then worked on allowing the loading of different types of players depending on the species selected. Of course, it didn't work first time. In fact, it took me about a week to figure out as I kept trying different methods which all seemed to end up with different errors. At some point, I must have also done something to cause a bug in the player animations, though I didn't realise this at the time, so you might notice that in some of the footage. At the moment, players can either host or join a game from the multiplayer menu scene, where they also choose their username and species. Then, players will load into the game lobby, where they can move around and see the other players. Once the host has pressed start, the game should then load. This is what I started working on next, but I got stuck on some errors with the cameras. The lobby scene was also not unloading for some reason, so I think there might be a problem with the scene changing code and I might have to rewrite it. At this point, I was feeling quite worn down by working on multiplayer, so I took a bit of a break and started working on some art for the win and lose screens. I'm not really sure whether I like it or not though. It'd be great if you could let me know what you think in the comments. Overall, I'm happy with the progress I made, and even though there's lots more to do, at least I'm a step closer to making the game multiplayer. I'm going to university soon, so development might slow down a little bit, but I'll still try to find some time to work on the game. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.